The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the law office, casting long shadows across the polished mahogany table. Margaret Wellington sat quietly in her tailored beige blazer, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the turmoil of the past few weeks. Her hands rested calmly in her lap, pearl earrings catching the light as she turned her head slightly toward the lawyer's desk. 3 months had passed since Richard's funeral. 3 months since she had buried her husband of 34 years. The man who had built a technology empire from nothing. The man who had given her a life of comfort and luxury. The man who, in his final years, had grown distant and cold. "Mrs. Wellington," said Mr. Harrison, the family attorney, as he adjusted his reading glasses. "Thank you for coming today. As you know, we're here to read Richard's will." Margaret nodded silently. Across the room, her son Bradley shifted impatiently in his chair. At 42, he had inherited his father's sharp features, but none of his business sense. Bradley had always expected wealth to simply fall into his lap. He cleared his throat, loudly breaking the peaceful quiet of the office. "Let's get on with it," Bradley said, his voice carrying an edge of arrogance. "I have a meeting with the board this afternoon." Margaret watched her son with sad eyes. When had he become so cold? So entitled? She remembered the little boy who used to climb into her lap for bedtime stories. That child seemed like a stranger now. Mr. Harrison opened the thick document and began to read. His voice was steady and professional as he worked through the legal language. Margaret listened carefully, her blue eyes focused on the lawyer's face. She had been married to Richard long enough to know that he always had surprises up his sleeve. "To my son Bradley," the lawyer read, "I leave my vintage car collection and the sum of $5 million. Bradley's face lit up with satisfaction. He leaned back in his chair, already calculating his newfound wealth. Margaret felt a familiar pang of disappointment. Money seemed to be the only thing that brought joy to her son's face anymore. "However," Mr. Harrison continued, and Bradley's smile faltered slightly, "this inheritance comes with conditions." The room grew quiet again. Margaret could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sounds of traffic from the street below. She folded her hands more tightly in her lap, sensing that something important was about to happen. Bradley must complete 1 year of volunteer work at a charitable organization of his mother's choosing. He must also undergo financial counseling and prove that he can manage money responsibly. If these conditions are not met within 2 years, his inheritance will be donated to charity. Bradley's face turned red with anger. He jumped to his feet, the chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor. "What kind of nonsense is this?" he shouted. "Dad promised me everything. And his only son." Margaret remained perfectly still, watching her son's outburst with growing sadness. This was exactly what Richard had been afraid of. Their son had become spoiled and ungrateful, interested only in what he could take rather than what he could give. "There's more," Mr. Harrison said gently, looking directly at Margaret. "To my beloved wife Margaret, who has stood by my side through every challenge and success, who has given me more love than I deserved, especially in my final years when I became difficult and withdrawn." Margaret felt tears beginning to form in her eyes. Richard had noticed her patience after all. Even when he had been struggling with his illness, pushing everyone away, she had stayed close. She had held his hand through the sleepless nights and the difficult treatments. "I leave the remainder of my estate, totaling $87 million, along with all properties, businesses, and investments." The silence in the room was complete. Margaret could hardly believe what she was hearing. Bradley stood frozen, his mouth open in shock. She had expected to receive the house and perhaps a small amount to live comfortably. She had never imagined that Richard would leave her the bulk of his fortune. "But that's impossible," Bradley stammered. "She's just his wife, and his flesh and blood." Mr. Harrison looked at Bradley with disapproval. Your father was very clear in his wishes. He also included a personal letter for your mother. With shaking hands, Margaret accepted the envelope. Her name was written on the front in Richard's familiar handwriting. She opened it carefully and began to read silently. My dearest Margaret, if you are reading this, then I'm gone, and I hope you can forgive an old fool for the way I treated you in my final years. The doctors told me the cancer was affecting my mind, making me angry and suspicious of everyone, even you. But through it all, you never left my side. I watched Bradley grow into a man who expects everything and appreciates nothing. I hope these conditions will teach him the value of hard work and giving back to others. You always said he had a good heart buried underneath all that selfishness. Maybe now he'll find it. You, my love, have earned every penny of this inheritance. You sacrificed your own dreams to support mine. You raised our son while I traveled the world building my business. You nursed me through my illness with endless patience and grace. The money is yours to do with as you choose. I know you'll use it wisely, probably giving most of it away to help others. That's who you are, and that's why I love you. Be happy. Margaret, you deserve all the joy in the world. Forever yours. Richard. Margaret wiped away a tear and folded the letter carefully. She looked up to find Bradley staring at her with a mixture of anger and disbelief. Mom, he said, his voice suddenly softer, more like the child she remembered. You have to share this with me. I'm your son. Margaret stood slowly and walked to the window. Outside, the California sun was shining brightly on the busy street. People were walking by, living their lives, facing their own challenges and celebrations. She thought about all the good she could do with Richard's gift, the scholarships she could create, the charities she could support, the difference she could make. Bradley, she said quietly, turning back to face her son. Your father's conditions aren't punishment. They're an opportunity to become the man I know you can be. Bradley's expression was confused and hurt, but what about the money? The money will be here when you've earned it, Margaret replied. But first, you need to learn what it means to give, not just to take. Your father understood that. Now it's time for you to understand it too. She walked over to her son and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. I love you, Bradley, but love sometimes means saying no. It means helping someone grow instead of making things easy for them. As they left the law office together, Margaret felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. Richard's final gift wasn't just the money. It was the chance for their family to heal, to grow, and to find their way back to each other. The afternoon sun warmed her face as she walked toward her car, knowing that the real work was just beginning.